At the beginning there was chaos. There were many gaming machines out there and they were all different and unique in their own way, offering one-of-the-kind experiences. Then came the Amiga, and with one sweep blow instantly destroyed the competition. This video is about some of the games that never left the system. Good or bad, they were only on the Amiga. If you ever wondered how a budget version of Lotus Turbo Challenge would look like, wonder no more. I'm here to show you. In fact, I'll show you how the discounted budget rushed low quality version would end up looking. Rajd Przez Polske, which roughly translates to a race through Poland, is a 1996 arcade racer that sees you driving from one end of Poland to another, with individual routes connecting country's major cities, all within the allotted time limit. While the background graphics between the stages change a little, they don't feel very imaginative and are rather simple and bland. Same can be said about the on-road traffic. There's only 3 different kinds of cars that you'll ever get to pass by, and they're the same ones that you can pick to drive yourself. And these are popular in Poland in the late 80s and early 90s: Fiat Cinquecento, Fiat 126p and Polone Escaro. And if you haven't heard of some of these, it's because they were, well, at least one of them was, nearly entirely exclusive to Poland and not sold anywhere else. And while they're all anything but fancy, they do have certain charm to them. In reality, that is. Anyway, while it's an interesting choice of vehicles, I mean you would not typically see cars like that in standard racers, they were hardly machines that anyone would correlate with racing, with mostly tiny engines and low bhp. It could obviously be argued that the game was based on an earlier title, namely Cross Country Road Race, and was supposed to be a racer as well as teach geography of Poland. But quite honestly, while the subject itself may be interesting to some, the way this game presented it was beyond dull. In short, Rajd Przez Polskę sounds bad, looks terrible and plays mid. It's not a game I would recommend to anyone other than the avid racing fan, so that they could just add it to their collection and keep boxed unwrapped forever and ever. All that said, while not great, it's also nowhere near the worst racer that I've played. And I can understand and appreciate the melancholy factor it may serve to those who played it back in the day and those who hail from Poland. Personally, I don't care much about it today. I'm not sure when exactly it was or how long it ran for, but sometime in the 2000s there was this show called Pimp My Ride. Now, objectively speaking, it wasn't great, though I found it eerily enchanting and would devour every episode that was running if I only happened to be watching TV when it was on. And since back then I did actually still watch TV, I've seen a few. The premise was that they took those old beaten up cars and remade them fresh with new look, new interiors and filled them with tech to the brim. Overkill is that. A remade, pimped up Defender, covered with a fresh layer of multicolored paint and brought up to the technological capabilities of Amiga by 1993. Quite literally, other than the entire remade presentation, not much else has been added or changed. While Defender's gameplay formula was new and fun when it originally released in 1981, same gameplay mechanics with virtually no changes in 1993 were not as enchanting. I mean, sure, Overkill looked incredible, the colors spilled from every nook and cranny of the screen and the sounds were modernized and well-fitting. But I didn't want to play an early 80s game in the 90s. I wanted something new and flashy, not old and rehashed. And I suppose no one else did either, as Overkill was never as popular as the devs probably hoped that it would be. It's hard to wonder about its obscurity though, as not only it did nothing new, but also released on AGA systems only. This alone limited the game's potential player base to a very small subset of all Amiga owners. As highlighted initially, since the difference between Overkill and Defender are just in the presentation, you can bet that Overkill is as demanding as original it was copying is. It's through the roof difficult, to the point of being frustrating and not challenging. Well, perhaps not in the first couple levels, but the difficulty ramps up rapidly and it's not everyone's cup of tea. Certainly not mine, so I'm definitely not a fan. But let me make this perfectly clear. Overkill is not a bad game whatsoever. It was just dead on arrival, turned out of its time and too tough for its own good. Nemac IV The Director's Cut is a renamed version of the original Nemac IV released on CD and with an animated pre-rendered intro. Other than that, there are no differences to the year prior's disc-based version. Nemac IV is a late Amiga sci-fi first-person shooter, and it was technical achievement on the system as it could theoretically run on any Amiga with at least 1 MB of RAM. Granted, approaching it with the most basic configuration was pointless and the game was an unplayable mess of ginormous pixels in a letter stamp-sized window, but it was doable. So the more power you can throw at it, the better it will look and run. That said, it can never really reach the heights of of Alien Breed 3D2 or Genetic Species, but arguably these two were the best looking FPSs on the Amiga. Neither of them could be run on Amiga 500 though, so I suppose Nemac IV wins on a technicality. I don't know what it wins exactly, but if there's a reward for it, it should get it. Anyway, the titular Nemac IV, according to the game story, is a supercomputer located in a high-tech, well-secured underground bunker, and it's used to control all the automated military arsenal in the world. Stupid idea to leave it all in the quote-unquote hands of a single machine, but it's probably no worse than leaving it to humans. So, one of those days, when a routine simulation was running on it, something happened and it mistook the combat simulation for reality, assumed that its creators were the enemies, and started gearing up for humanity's destruction, preparing all the world's tanks, trash-can-looking battle robots, and nuclear weaponry alike. All the toys of destruction were at its disposal, is what I'm saying. So, your aim in the game is to take a remotely controlled robot through 40 more and more demanding levels to eventually find and destroy Nemac IV's reactor core. On one hand, Nemac IV looks great and the animated cutscenes were literally jaw-dropping for the time. On another, sound design is not great and the levels are rather boringly designed, all grain and samey all throughout the game. Though it has to be said that the first few are especially unimpressive as compared to the rest of the game. So while Nemac IV is technically impressive and a good attempt at FPS on the Amiga, it is not very fun. Do whatever you please with that knowledge. Odyssey is an action platformer with some puzzle-solving elements released at the tail end of Amiga's commercial life. And it shows. It's beautiful, super smoothly scrolling, fluidly animated and has crazy good designed levels. It's just a pleasure to behold even on the most basic A500. It's not a pleasure to play though, for me at least, as it's quite challenging during all the combat encounters, especially in the earlier parts of the game. Others may enjoy it, and judging by the Lemon Amiga and Moby Games scores, they all do. But I just find it frustrating. It's not on the game though, it's on me. So don't base your opinion of it on my feelings alone. Story-wise, your uncle killed your father, the king, dick move I must add, and took the crown for himself. After a few long years in exile, you're finally ready to take back the throne and kill the treacherous usurper. He's not an elderly weakling though and surrounded by a literal army of his lackeys, so to be able to face him, you'll need to become powerful. Way more than you are when initially heading off on your adventure. To do so, you will need to find and claim the power of the crystals that are scattered all around the kingdom. You'll spend most of the game running around 7 huge always scrolling levels, platforming your way through the Metroidvania style, fighting your evil uncle's goons and solving various puzzles. Most of them are your typical find an object and bring it to the correct spot fair or opening locked off passages. The gimmick of the Odyssey is that you can morph into various animals, each of them with their own unique set of skills and abilities, and you will have to do that often, to overcome some of the more challenging in-game sequences and to pass certain obstacles. What's most impressive about Odyssey, however, is that the developer, Audiogenic, were basically two guys who worked on the game with virtually no outside help. And what they ended up with, both technically and gameplay-wise, is short of magnificent, even if not for me. So while I don't love the game personally, I can definitely recommend that you try it out as most people find it incredible. Let's start with a short lesson. A lido is an old English word for an open-air swimming pool or fashionable beach resort. It's not something that I knew before researching the game for one of my earlier videos, and it's also not a word that I ever heard or used in a conversation. Yeah. Anyway, Hillsea Lido is a game that's really obscure and probably why it never left the Amiga, all because of how it was distributed, not because of its quality, which in fact is fantastic. Vulkan Software, the developer, never sold their games in shops, but rather advertised them in gaming mags and sold by mail order. And interestingly, all Vulkan games, apart from the famous Valhalla duology, were entirely different in terms of their themes and genres. It made for an interesting library and one worth tracking down if you're an Amiga collector. Anyway, coming back to Hillsea Lido, it's a seaside management sim not far off thematically from games like Theme Park. You start the game with £1 million and an empty beach and promenade to develop on. Your ultimate goal is obviously to earn as much money as possible, but to do so you have to create as attractive locales as you can. So you'll start with something simple like an eatery or a shop, you'll hire staff, set their wages, order supplies for your attractions, and finally set up prices for your wares or services. You will also need to keep the seaside clean, so you'll get the cleaners, someone to collect the money from all the businesses, and preferably a bodyguard to keep that fellow safe and make sure that he doesn't get mugged on his way back with all the hard-earned dough. Naturally, in time, some of your stalls may require repairing or maintenance, and there are people who can be paid to sort it all out too. A lifeguard is always a good idea, given how smart and responsible people are. So, do it all, do it well, and keep expanding, and you'll be on a straight road for the riches and to have a lot of fun playing Hillsea Lido. If you like business management and simulation games, Hillsea Lido is excellent and also quite funny at times. So check it out. Dragonstone is a sequel to Dark Mirror and a top-down fantasy action role-playing, and it looks amazing, with its very Zelda-esque design to both its graphics and gameplay, at least when compared to early Zelda titles. So, focusing much more on the action rather than the role-playing. Story-wise, you're a 4-year-old man with no memory of before, whatever that means. But having no memory does not mean having no purpose, and soon enough you'll learn that you'll to travel to a distant island to slay dragons that took it over. But before you're anywhere near doing just that, there'll be a lot of typical for the genre adventuring and questing. So running around the game world, collecting and carrying items to their respective owners and killing baddies. Rinse and repeat. It may seem a tad simplistic, but that's what you get for trying to copy an 80s game in the 90s. The tech progressed and our machines were much more capable. Improving the graphics alone is just not enough. And this simple design also lends itself to Dragonstone's biggest issue. It's an uneven game. What I mean by that is while all the quests are incredibly easy, mainly following the take object from person A to person B, who will give you the item that person C needs to give you something instead, and that something is what person D requires. Like I said, a lot of walking but hardly a challenge. And in the same time, combat, at least in the first half, 2/3 of the game maybe, is very demanding. And the fact that the collision boxes are unclear doesn't make it any easier. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depends how you want to look at it, at some point the difficulty will top, and from then onward it will become easier and easier, making for the late game to be a breeze. So yeah, this also feels uneven. Graphics and sounds are phenomenal actually, and if the rest of the Dragonstone was of comparable quality, we would have had a hit on our hands. But painstakingly detailed and beautifully animated sprites cannot make up for the game's shortcomings, and what we ended up with is a very solid but sadly unexceptional old-style action RPG. Borobodour is a futuristic sci-fi mixed genre action-adventure. On the far-off planet Borobodour, evil Ragnova is constructing a terrible device that once completed is said to be capable of destroying all technology, and henceforth bringing the planet back to the Dark Ages. Since Batman's all the way back on Earth on my couch munching on something maniacally, you're our only hope of stopping him. I'm Batman! What? I see. Sure, I'll clear that up. Sorry. Apparently Bruce is not eating for the sake of eating alone or just to snack on something, but he's recovering after a particularly challenging encounter with a supervillain. He's been here last 2 weeks not moving an inch other than to go to the fridge or toilet, so I don't know what imaginary enemy he was battling. Unless it was his inner demons, then yeah, by all means, as he's got a ton of these. Anyway, that's more or less how Borobodour, the Planet of Doom, begins. Most of the game takes place in a side-scrolling platformer fashion, where you run around the levels seeking out and collecting a number of hidden objects that are required to open the exit to the next stage. Simple stuff really. And as you go about it, you'll obviously have to defeat various enemies, gather power-ups and even do some very basic environmental puzzling. It's mainly Switch related, so don't expect to stretch that brain muscle of yours too much. You're not there on Borobodour to think after all, you're there to kill a lot. Then there are the quote-unquote driving/flying stages, where you pilot a spaceship in a third person behind the vehicle view. Same as in platforming levels, enemies will attack you constantly, and also same as in there, you'll have to bring their miserable lives to an abrupt and predictable end. Don't feel bad for them though, they're the bad guys. I mean, you're you, so by definition you're good, you're the protagonist of the game after all. Finally, there's a proper puzzling stage in which you need to move blocks over the board to recreate a specific pattern within the time limit. It's not overly challenging, but it's a nice change of pace and will finally give you a chance to shine in other ways than the body count. Borobodour may not be the best action game out there, in fact it's rather odd and unusual, but it's not a bad one, and it's more than worth a playthrough. Airtaxi, to simplify it, is a multiplayer AG in a different setting. Instead of prehistoric time, you operate in the future, and there can be up to 5 players playing simultaneously, causing absolute mayhem on the screen on a single Amiga, which you're sadly not going to see in this video, even if it's the most fun way of enjoying the game. Still, the basic premise prevails when you play alone and you have to pick up passengers from numbered platforms and then deliver them to those that they need to get to. They come in 3 classes: yellow, red and white. Unsurprisingly, a successful delivery of this rewards money, but if you crash, land too hard so that you're destroyed, or fail in any other way causing their demise, you'll have to pay for those deaths, quite literally out of your pocket. And early in the game it can be quite crippling. In the end, it's a great life lesson of slower, sometimes being actually faster. The further you progress in the levels, the more difficult and chaotic they'll be, adding various different obstacles to their design. This, naturally, will require mastering new gameplay concepts. So things like skyscrapers, magnetic fields, wind or even adjusted gravity in some spots will be your bread and butter among others, and you will have to get accustomed to all of them. They will keep you on your toes, but will also make the game more fun and chaotic in multiplayer. While AG is easily my favorite single-player version of the game because of that specific charm it emanates, charm that other games just don't have, Airtaxi is most likely the best version of the game to play with others. Or best I played, and easily a game to fill an afternoon. So if you have someone with you, get the game, fire it up and just get lost in an action-packed delivery bonanza. If you thought that the last episode's Forest Dump was it, and you'll never get to hear about the game again, I'm here to correct you. Because few years later after the original, LK Avalon released Forest Dump Forever. Equally as dump game, but with a twist. Said twist being that the action has moved from the forest to a castle, and that the game was not a carbon copy of Super Frog anymore. At least not to the same, a way too obvious degree. Generally speaking, you're playing as the same protagonist and doing the exact same things you did in original. So collecting coins for the exit to open, all within the time limit. Same as last time too, the levels are rather large and always scrolling, full of various obstacles, deadly spikes and enemies. And identically to the predecessor, you dispose of the enemies by jumping on their heads, and spikes dispose of you by having you jump on them. And trust me, after a long session of Forest Dump Forever, you will be seeking those bad boys out just to throw yourself at them and end this terrible endeavor. But believe it or not, Forest Dump Forever is an obvious upgrade on the first game. Not graphically, as it stayed the same, so pretty decent, even if at times simple in terms of its animations. And definitely not in terms of sound design, which still has no in-game music and only a handful of sound effects. But in terms of the games that it copies. It's not Super Frog only anymore, and some design ideas clearly come from Rough and Tumble this time too. And don't get me wrong, both Super Frog and Rough and Tumble are excellent, far better than this monstrosity. But having some of their elements seemingly randomly put together in an entirely different game is as odd as it seems when you think about it. As below average generic platformers go, I've played worse. In fact, I've played much worse, and I'm sure you have too. But it doesn't mean that Forest Dump Forever is worth recommending. Especially that same as its predecessor, it's rather uninspired and boring. I mean, I wouldn't refuse playing it if it was running somewhere and someone would handle me a joystick telling me that it's my turn, but I also wouldn't ever run it on my own. Play it or don't, your call. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't played Hybris before I started working on my older, by today's standards rather rough 10 years of Amiga gaming series. And it's a criminal overlooking on my side, as not only Hybris is excellent, easily better than most Amiga vertically scrolling shoot-em-ups, but also a top 10, maybe even top 5 shooter on the system overall. And it came out in 1988. Way before Amiga peaked around 92-93. Let's start from the beginning though. Hybris takes place in 2461, a good year, in equally as good future. But when things are too good for too long, something's bound to happen. This particular time, one of Earth's colonies on an alien planet Jurica has been destroyed, missing, hard to tell really, as any contacts with it ceased permanently. So, naturally, a task force is assembled and a scout ship is sent to figure out what took place and save any colonies if there are still any alive out there. The game is composed out of 3 levels only, desert, ocean and mountains themed, but they are huge and all incredibly well designed, sporting unique to each other features. Both your ship and the swarms of enemies coming at you at all times are painstakingly detailed to the last pixel and small works of art. It doesn't hurt that there's quite a few different ones too, keeping the gameplay fresh all the way through. Your craft can have 5 different upgrades mounted on it, and you should make sure to pick the right ones for your playstyle, to have as much fun as possible. As while different in how they work and their power, they are all feasible choices for the entire campaign. It's worth adding that the weapons can be mounted on your ship or split from it, flying around it as supplemental satellites of death. Satellites of death. I should really copyright it. Man, but make a note of that. Anyway, the choice of staying as one or splitting is a tough one and should be best taken in response to the on-screen situation. You cannot make those switches infinitely, and there's only few times that you can do it, so don't overuse it too early. The bosses pop up both mid at the end of the levels and are usually much bigger and incomparably more challenging than the usual trash that you'll mowing through. They will require pattern memorization and ability to fight under immense pressure, so qualities that you quite fortunately have in abundance, my dear viewer. Graphics of Hybris is what I'd like to call arcade quality, meaning that Hybris wouldn't stick out negatively if it was put on a cabinet and kept in an arcade somewhere. In fact, in 1988 it would look great there any way you wanna look at it. Sounds and music are excellent too, especially all the explosions that are appropriately impactful sounding and meaty. It's great. All that said, Hybris is not the easiest of shooters out there. It can get hectic at times and demands your full attention. But it's not fake tough though, meaning you won't experience any cheap deaths, and if you die, it'll be your mistake and yours only. Interestingly enough, when Hybris released, there was a controversy surrounding its existence, as apparently it looked very similar to Danga UFO robo game from the arcades. It escalated so much that at some point it seemed that the copyright infringement claims seemed inevitable. But at least as far as I know, nothing was ever proven or done about it. And today is just a fun curiosity. Hybris is amazing, and if you like shooters even just a little, definitely check it out. Amiga was a treasure trove of incredible experiences, and today's selection, barring a title or two, is a really fun example of these. So if you never had the system, these were the games to track down and play. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.